Harlem, mid-1930s, stretching into the early years of the 1940s. The streets outside are alive. Music spilling from clubs, laughter drifting through open windows, numbers runners moving quietly from block to block. Harlem looks vibrant on the surface, but beneath that rhythm, power is being negotiated in places most people never see. This meeting doesn't happen in a courtroom. It doesn't happen in daylight. It happens in a private back room, smoke heavy in the air, the kind of room where decisions are made without paperwork and enforced without signatures. The meeting was arranged through intermediaries. No phone calls, no written messages, just trusted men carrying words from one side of the city to the other. The Italians arrive first. They are not bosses, yet. They are emissaries, representatives of a larger force. Men sent by Lucky Luciano's world to feel the ground, to test the temperature, to see whether Harlem can be pressured the way other territories had been. They do not come empty-handed. Under their jackets, the weight is obvious. Metal, cold, prepared. The guns are not drawn yet, but everyone in the room knows they're there. And that's the point. This is not about violence. It's about suggestion. Moments later, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson walks in. No entourage, no visible weapon, no rush in his step. He is calm, completely calm. Bumpy had been in dangerous rooms his entire adult life. Prison yards, alleyways, courtrooms. He understood fear, but he never let it speak for him. He takes his seat without ceremony. He doesn't scan the room. He doesn't acknowledge the weapons. That silence unsettles people more than shouting ever could. At some point, depending on which Underworld account you believe, the jackets shift. Hands move. Guns are revealed just enough to be seen. Not raised, not aimed. Displayed. The room freezes. On paper, the power imbalance is obvious. Multiple armed men, one unarmed black gangster sitting alone. This is how intimidation usually works. But something unexpected happens. Nothing. Bumpy doesn't flinch. He doesn't lean back. He doesn't lean forward. Because the men with guns misunderstand what kind of power they're facing. They think power lives in weapons. Bumpy knows power lives in territory, in people, in systems that don't collapse when one man pulls a trigger. Those guns could kill him, but they couldn't replace him. They couldn't collect numbers on 135th Street. They couldn't move money through Harlem churches and storefronts. They couldn't survive the backlash that would come from killing the man everyone in Harlem recognized as the final authority. And everyone in that room, on some level, knew it. That's why the guns never fired. This moment isn't preserved in transcripts. There are no court records, no official minutes. It exists in patterns, in outcomes, in the fact that Harlem was never taken by force. Because what mattered was not the guns. What mattered was why they failed. They had guns. Bumpy had Harlem. And in that room, for the first time, the men sent by Lucky Luciano understood a truth that Dutch Schultz learned too late. Some territories can't be conquered. They have to be respected. To understand why the guns failed in that room, you have to understand the man they were pointed at. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, known to the world as Bumpy Johnson, was not born into power. He was born in 1905 in Charleston, South Carolina, into a world that offered black men very few paths upward and many paths downward. His nickname, Bumpy, came from a noticeable bump on the back of his head. But it followed him into adulthood as a reminder that he never quite blended in, and never tried to. When Bumpy moved north to Harlem as a young man, the neighborhood was in the middle of a transformation. This was the era of the Harlem Renaissance. Jazz, poetry, culture, ambition. But alongside that beauty was something else. Opportunity money, and exploitation. The numbers racket, an illegal lottery played openly in barbershops, beauty salons, churches, and corner stores, had become the economic heartbeat of Harlem. It wasn't just gambling. It was survival. People played numbers hoping to pay rent, buy food, bury loved ones with dignity. And wherever money flows, power follows. Bumpy Johnson didn't invent the numbers racket. He didn't even control it at first. What he became was something far more important. He became the man who kept it from being stolen. Early on, Bumpy worked as an enforcer, learning the streets block by block, learning which corners mattered, which people carried influence, and which problems required fists, and which required patience. And patience was his real weapon. Unlike many gangsters of his era, Bumpy was known to think before he acted. He listened more than he spoke. He remembered everything: names, faces, slights, favors. People who underestimated him often made that mistake only once. But Bumpy was never just muscle. He was a strategist. He understood something outsiders never did: that Harlem was not a gang territory, it was a community, a fragile one that would not accept foreign control easily, no matter how much force was applied. That understanding shaped his reputation. Violence followed Bumpy, but it did not define him. He didn't rule by terror. He ruled by predictability. People knew where they stood with him. That alone reduced chaos. When Bumpy went to prison, and he went many times, he didn't come out angrier. He came out sharper. In prison, including time spent later at Alcatraz, Bumpy read constantly: philosophy, history, poetry, Shakespeare. He wrote letters quoting lines that surprised even his enemies. It confused people. They expected a brute. They got a thinker. That combination, street authority and intellectual discipline, made Bumpy dangerous in a way guns never could. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't emotional. And he never confused power with noise. Most importantly, Bumpy believed something deeply. Harlem was his responsibility, not his possession, not his playground. His responsibility. That belief is what separated him from men like Dutch Schultz, and what made men like Lucky Luciano cautious instead of confident. So when Italian emissaries sat across from him with guns hidden under their coats, they weren't facing a man trying to prove himself. They were facing a man who already knew exactly who he was. And men like that don't need to raise their voice, they just need to stay seated. To outsiders, Harlem was just a neighborhood, a collection of brownstones, jazz clubs, and crowded streets. But for Bumpy Johnson and the people he protected, Harlem was much more than geography. It was a living, breathing community, a place where every block had its own rhythm, every storefront carried a story, and every family had a connection. And within that rhythm flowed money, a river controlled by the numbers racket, the illegal lottery that was as much about survival as it was about chance. The Italians, no matter how powerful, could never just take it. They could threaten, they could bribe, they could pull guns, but they could not replicate the trust Bumpy had built over years. Trust that came not from fear, but from respect, consistency, and fairness. The people of Harlem knew him. They trusted him. They depended on him. This was not a street-level detail. This was an empire, and its currency was loyalty. The numbers racket generated millions each week, and that money was not just profit. It was community wealth. Families paid rent. Shops stayed open. Funerals were dignified. And sometimes, dreams were funded for a generation that had too few opportunities elsewhere. That is why Harlem mattered. Not for its clubs, not for its lights, not for the music drifting down Lenox Avenue, but for the control, the networks, the trust that kept it alive. Outside the neighborhood, men like Lucky Luciano saw only dollars, opportunity, a market to expand into. But inside Harlem, Bumpy knew something they couldn't. Power without legitimacy in the community was always temporary. Attempt to take Harlem by force, and it would collapse. Not just through bullets, but through resistance from the people who had learned to depend on him. This understanding had already shaped history. In 1935, Dutch Schultz had tried to muscle into Harlem. Schultz had guns, muscle, and ambition. He had confidence. But he underestimated the invisible structures, Bumpy Johnson and the network he controlled. He thought intimidation would work. It didn't. And Schultz paid the ultimate price for failing to understand the human architecture of Harlem. And now, a decade later, Luciano's men were at the same crossroads. They were armed, organized, powerful. But Harlem had its own rules, and Bumpy knew those rules better than anyone. For the emissaries in that back room, it was a lesson in limits. Guns could impress on paper. Money could buy influence elsewhere. But in Harlem, the lines were clear. You could not take what you did not earn. And Bumpy Johnson had earned it, not with threats, not with violence, but with strategy, patience, and the respect of a community. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about territory. It was about sovereignty, the quiet authority of a man who commanded obedience simply by existing in his rightful place. And in that room, as the Italian emissaries waited for Bumpy to blink, one truth became clear. They were in Harlem, but Harlem was not in them. To outsiders, Harlem was just a neighborhood, a collection of brownstones, jazz clubs, and crowded streets. But for Bumpy Johnson and the people he protected, Harlem was much more than geography. It was a living, breathing community, a place where every block had its own rhythm. Every storefront carried a story, and every family had a connection. And within that rhythm flowed money, a river controlled by the numbers racket. The illegal lottery that was as much about survival as it was about chance. The Italians, no matter how powerful, could never just take it. They could threaten, they could bribe, they could pull guns, but they could not replicate the trust Bumpy had built over years. Trust that came not from fear, but from respect, consistency, and fairness. The people of Harlem knew him. They trusted him. They depended on him. This was not a street-level detail. This was an empire, and its currency was loyalty. The numbers racket generated millions each week, and that money was not just profit. It was community wealth. Families paid rent, shops stayed open, funerals were dignified, and sometimes dreams were funded for a generation that had too few opportunities elsewhere. That is why Harlem mattered. Not for its clubs, not for its lights, not for the music drifting down Lenox Avenue, but for the control, the networks, the trust that kept it alive. Outside the neighborhood, men like Lucky Luciano saw only dollars, opportunity, a market to expand into. But inside Harlem, Bumpy knew something they couldn't. Power without legitimacy in the community was always temporary. Attempt to take Harlem by force, and it would collapse, not just through bullets, but through resistance from the people who had learned to depend on him. This understanding had already shaped history. In 1935, Dutch Schultz had tried to muscle into Harlem. Schultz had guns, muscle, and ambition. He had confidence, but he underestimated the invisible structures, Bumpy Johnson and the network he controlled. He thought intimidation would work. It didn't. and Schultz paid the ultimate price for failing to understand the human architecture of Harlem. And now, a decade later, Luciano's men were at the same crossroads. They were armed, organized, powerful. But Harlem had its own rules, and Bumpy knew those rules better than anyone. For the emissaries in that back room, it was a lesson in limits. Guns could impress on paper. Money could buy influence elsewhere. But in Harlem, the lines were clear. You could not take what you did not earn. And Bumpy Johnson had earned it, not with threats, not with violence, but with strategy, patience, and the respect of a community. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about territory. It was about sovereignty, the quiet authority of a man who commanded obedience simply by existing in his rightful place. And in that room, as the Italian emissaries waited for Bumpy to blink, one truth became clear. They were in Harlem, but Harlem was not in them. By 1946, Lucky Luciano was no ordinary mobster. He was the architect of modern organized crime in America. A man who had rebuilt the Mafia after years of turmoil, creating structure where chaos once reigned. Territories were divided. Operations were coordinated. Violence was measured. Business, not impulse, was the law of the land. Luciano had just been released from prison, serving a sentence that had kept him locked away for nearly a decade. The government had made him a deal. Use your influence to help secure the Italian docks during the war effort, and your sentence will be commuted. He had delivered. But now, the feds had one final condition: deportation. Within weeks, he would be sent back to Italy, permanently. Before leaving, Luciano needed to secure his empire. His families were in order, the docks were under control, and the streets of Manhattan mostly obeyed the new order. Everything was running smoothly, except one piece of the puzzle: Harlem. Harlem remained outside Italian control, and it was thriving. Millions of dollars flowed weekly through the numbers racket, through stores, beauty salons, churches, and homes. To an outsider, it was just a market. To Bumpy Johnson, it was life, community, and power combined. Luciano knew he could not take Harlem by force. He had learned, perhaps too late, from the mistakes of Dutch Schultz. Guns, muscle, and threats had failed before. Now he had to negotiate, and so he sent word, a meeting. The emissaries went first, guns were drawn, intimidation was attempted. And then, Bumpy Johnson arrived. He walked in alone, calm, unarmed, unafraid. Luciano, well aware of Bumpy's reputation, allowed him to take the seat at the head of the table, usually reserved for the boss himself. There was a pause, a quiet tension that could be felt across the room. Every man present, bodyguards, underbosses, accountants, watched. Every gesture mattered. Every eye movement carried weight. Luciano understood immediately that this was not a man to intimidate. This was a man who controlled something far more valuable than fear: the loyalty, infrastructure, and trust of Harlem itself. For the first time, Luciano realized a truth that guns could not teach. Power is not only measured in force, but in control that cannot be taken by force. He also understood that to negotiate with Bumpy Johnson, he would need patience, tact, and respect. Qualities Schultz had never considered. And so the stage was set. Not for violence, not for bloodshed, but for strategy. The Italians had come armed, but they were about to learn that the most dangerous man in the room didn't need a gun. The room was silent, smoke hanging heavy, history in the making. And in that moment, a meeting began that would define the underworld of New York for decades to come. The tension in the room was almost tangible. Smoke curled from cigars. Crystal glasses reflected the faint glow of overhead lights. Every man's heartbeat seemed louder than the one before. The emissaries from Luciano shifted in their seats. Their hands brushed the cold metal of their weapons. Fingers tightened around grips. Jackets twitched, and eyes flicked to Bumpy Johnson, searching for the slightest hint of fear. And then, just enough to be seen, the guns were revealed. Not raised, not fired, just displayed. A silent reminder, we are ready. In almost any other room in America, this display would have been enough. Guns command obedience. They demand attention. They make people comply. But Harlem had its own rules, and Bumpy Johnson had its own calculus. Bumpy didn't flinch. He didn't glance at the weapons. He didn't shift in his seat. He didn't speak. He simply sat, calm, measured, letting the room settle into an uncomfortable quiet. This was the moment where history could have turned. For the emissaries, on paper, the power imbalance was staggering. Multiple men, armed and trained, against one unarmed black gangster. And yet, they were waiting for a reaction that never came, because Bumpy knew something they didn't. Harlem was not theirs to take. He controlled the networks, the numbers runners, the loyalty of the community, the flow of money, the eyes of the police. He had built an empire rooted not in fear, but in influence and trust. And influence, once established, is far stronger than a trigger finger. Those guns, once meant to assert dominance, now seemed irrelevant. They were toys in the presence of true authority. The emissaries had brought muscle. Bumpy brought mastery. And in that stillness, a lesson was delivered without a word. The room may have been full of guns, but guns alone could not bend Harlem. This wasn't documented in newspapers. It wasn't recorded in police files. It exists only in the whispers of underworld legend, in the stories passed down by men who survived because they recognized the quiet power of Bumpy Johnson. In that moment, the Italians realized something fundamental. Intimidation might move ordinary men, but Bumpy Johnson was no ordinary man. The guns had failed. The balance of power had shifted, because Bumpy didn't need to lift a weapon. He only needed to remain seated, calm, and unafraid. And in Harlem, that was more dangerous than any gun. The room was tense, silent, heavy with expectation. The guns were visible, but they no longer mattered. Everyone in that back room knew that the true power in Harlem was not in firepower. It was in the man sitting alone at the head of the table. Bumpy Johnson leaned back slightly, still unarmed, still calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture wildly. He didn't threaten. He simply made them wait. Every second stretched long enough for the Italians to realize that the intimidation tactics they had brought were meaningless. Then, slowly, deliberately, Bumpy reached into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a single photograph. It was of a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, part of the Italian operation. In the image, one of Luciano's men was shaking hands with a known police captain. It was not a threat shouted aloud, but a reminder. Bumpy had eyes everywhere. He could expose connections, alliances, and secrets if the need arose. He slid the photograph across the table. Luciano picked it up, studied it. His face didn't change, but the tension shifted. This was a demonstration of control through knowledge, not bullets. Bumpy spoke quietly, almost conversationally. I could send these to the authorities. I could leak them to the press. I could dismantle your operation before anyone knew I had the evidence. But I didn't. Because we're not here to destroy each other. We're here to talk business. In that statement, the rules of the room became clear. Respect would be the currency. Intelligence, not weapons. would set the terms, and the Italians were forced to acknowledge it. Bumpy outlined the conditions. Harlem would remain black-run. Italian soldiers would never patrol the streets. Collections would be handled through business channels, not intimidation. Limited, negotiated participation would be allowed. Banking support, legal assistance, and a fixed percentage of profits. 10%, not 40% to be exact. Every detail was calculated, fair to the community, yet profitable to the Italians. He was not making a concession, he was asserting authority. Luciano, who had negotiated with presidents, mob bosses, and killers, leaned back and studied the man before him. This was a negotiation unlike any he had experienced. No gunfire, no threats, just rules, respect, and clear boundaries. Bumpy's strategy was simple but brilliant. He gave enough to keep the Italians invested. He ensured Harlem streets remained safe and independent. He demonstrated that loyalty and trust could not be bought, only earned. For the first time, the Italians realized that they were in Harlem, but Harlem was not in them. They were visitors in a system they could not dominate, and yet they could profit if they respected it. The guns had failed. Threats had failed. Bumpy Johnson's calm authority, intelligence, and strategic patience had forced the mob to stand down. And just like that, without a shot fired, Harlem remained his to protect. And the Italians had learned a lesson they would not forget. The meeting at the Stork Club ended without violence, but its impact would echo for decades. Bumpy Johnson had set terms. Harlem would remain under his control. Italian participation was limited, structured, and carefully defined. The guns that had once threatened him now rested uselessly in holsters. The emissaries understood a lesson that few in organized crime learned without bloodshed. You cannot take what is not yours by force. In the weeks that followed, the agreement held. Lucky Luciano returned to Italy, never to set foot on American soil again. Yet the deal he made with Bumpy Johnson endured. The Italians provided banking support through legitimate fronts. They offered legal assistance for arrests among the numbers runners. They received their agreed-upon share of profits, and Harlem stayed protected. Bumpy paid his portion, always on time. The arrangement was mutually beneficial, but it was also a test of respect and intelligence, not mere compliance. The photograph he had shown at the meeting remained a symbol, a quiet reminder that authority rested not in guns, but in knowledge, discipline, and strategy. When Bumpy was arrested in 1951 and sent to Alcatraz, Frank Costello personally ensured that his family and the Harlem operation remained protected. When he returned in 1963, Harlem had not forgotten him. The numbers racket continued, the streets remained under his influence, and the Italian families continued to honor the terms of the agreement. Historians and underworld figures alike would later call that meeting legendary, not for violence, not for blood, but for strategy, intelligence, and unshakable authority. Lucky Luciano himself reportedly said of Bumpy Johnson, "He was the smartest gangster I ever met. Dangerous not because he carried a gun, but because he didn't need me to respect him. He demanded it." Bumpy never bragged about the meeting. He didn't need to. The results spoke louder than any words. Harlem remained his domain, its people protected, its streets unthreatened by outside force. And in that quiet legacy, Bumpy Johnson showed the world that true power comes not from fear or weapons or intimidation, but from control, intelligence, and respect earned through action, not threats. The story of that meeting is more than a tale of mobsters, Harlem, or the numbers racket. It is a lesson in power, strategy, and respect. Bumpy Johnson didn't win because he was the strongest. He didn't win because he was the most feared. He won because he understood the rules no one else saw. Power is often mistaken for violence. Guns, threats, and intimidation are visible and loud, but they are fleeting. Influence, loyalty, and knowledge are quiet. They persist. They endure. They are harder to challenge because they are built on systems, relationships, and understanding. In that room at the Stork Club, the Italians had guns. Bumpy had Harlem. And that difference, subtle, invisible, profound, changed the course of organized crime in New York. For 3 weeks after, Luciano could plan, strategize, and fearlessly leave the country. But the streets of Harlem remained untouched. The Italians profited where they could. Bumpy collected what was his, and the community thrived. No bullets were fired, no chaos erupted. Only respect prevailed. The photograph of Albert Anastasia shaking hands with a police captain remained on Bumpy's desk for years. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. Intelligence outweighs intimidation. Strategy outweighs force. Respect outweighs fear. And that is the enduring lesson of Bumpy Johnson. The most dangerous man in any room isn't the one with a gun. It's the one who doesn't need it. For Harlem, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster. He was a protector, a strategist, and a legend. So when you think about power, remember this story. Respect is earned, authority is commanded, and the smartest moves are often the quietest. Because in the end, guns can be drawn. But true control is drawn from the mind, not the trigger.